June 6, 1944, 1:45 hours, 3 miles east of the Orne River, Normandy. Hauptmann Friedrich Holzer commanded a company holding defensive positions covering approaches to Caen. His evening had been routine. Reports received and forwarded, sentries positioned, relief schedules established. The front was quiet, with no indication of unusual Allied activity. British bombers had passed overhead earlier, presumably attacking targets deeper in France, but Holzer's sector remained calm. He was preparing to sleep for a few hours before morning stand to when his rest was interrupted by distant gunfire. The firing wasn't coming from expected directions, not from the established front lines where British forces were known to be positioned. Instead, Holzer heard bursts of automatic weapons fire from behind his company positions, from roads that should have been secure German territory. Then explosions, not artillery, but smaller charges that sounded like demolitions. Then more gunfire, closer now, interspersed with shouting in what might have been German but could also have been English. In the darkness and confusion, Holzer couldn't be certain. A runner arrived from battalion headquarters with orders that made no sense. British paratroopers had been dropped behind German lines. Numbers unknown, locations uncertain, objectives unclear. All units were to maintain defensive positions, establish security on rear approaches, and report any contact with enemy forces. Holzer absorbed this information with growing concern. Paratroopers behind his positions meant his company could be attacked from any direction, that his supply lines might be cut, that movement during darkness would expose his men to ambush by enemies who knew where German units were positioned, but whom German forces couldn't locate. Through the next hour, Holzer received contradictory reports that made tactical assessment impossible. A platoon reported engaging British forces on a road 2 miles east. Enemy strength unknown. Contact broken after brief firefight. Another position reported hearing movement nearby, but seeing nothing. Battalion reported that a bridge had been captured by British forces. Which bridge, exactly how many British troops, whether German forces could retake it, all unknown. Communications with units to Holzer's east had been lost. Whether due to technical problems or because those units had been attacked, Holzer couldn't determine. At 3:20 hours, one of Holzer's outlying positions was attacked. The assault was brief, violent, conducted in near-total silence except for gunfire and explosions. German sentries were killed before they could raise alarm. The position was overrun before Holzer could send reinforcements. When dawn came and Holzer could investigate the position, he found that 3 of his men were dead, 2 wounded, and the position's radio had been destroyed with explosive charges. The attackers had withdrawn into darkness, leaving no indication of their strength, identity, or where they'd gone. Holzer later wrote in his diary, "Fighting British paratroopers at night is unlike any combat I have experienced. They appear from darkness without warning, attack with precision that suggests they know our positions better than we do ourselves, then vanish before we can respond effectively. Our soldiers fire at sounds and shadows, wasting ammunition and revealing positions. Communications collapse as units report contacts that cannot be verified or coordinated. Officers cannot assess situations because information is unreliable and contradictory. The psychological effect is worse than the actual casualties. Men become afraid to move, afraid to speak, afraid that any action will reveal them to enemies they cannot see. I have fought Soviet forces, British regular infantry, American units. None created the same sense of helplessness that British paratroopers operating at night produce. The selection and training. British paratroopers were drawn from volunteer force, that underwent selection and training designed specifically to develop soldiers capable of operating effectively under conditions that would break conventionally trained infantry. The volunteers were screened for psychological stability, physical fitness, and demonstrated ability to think independently under stress. British airborne recruiters sought soldiers who would remain functional when isolated, surrounded, or operating without clear orders. Men who could assess situations independently and take appropriate action without requiring supervision. The screening process eliminated soldiers who required structure, who needed clear directions, or who became ineffective when circumstances deviated from training scenarios. The training emphasized night operations extensively. Paratroopers learned to navigate by terrain features and dead reckoning when visual references were minimal. They practiced movement techniques that minimized noise, proper foot placement, control of equipment to prevent rattling, discipline to avoid unnecessary talking. They developed night vision adaptation procedures that allowed them to see more effectively in darkness than soldiers whose training didn't emphasize low-light operations. The cumulative result was soldiers who were comfortable operating at night when most troops found darkness disorienting and threatening. The endurance standards exceeded normal infantry requirements. Training exercises continued for days without sleep, forcing soldiers to maintain combat effectiveness despite exhaustion that would disable soldiers who'd been trained only under favorable conditions. Paratroopers learned to function while hungry, tired, cold, and stressed simultaneously, conditions that were guaranteed during airborne operations where resupply was uncertain and where soldiers might be fighting continuously from insertion through link-up with ground forces. The tactical training emphasized small unit operations without support from heavier weapons or external coordination. Paratroopers were taught to attack using only weapons they could carry: rifles, grenades, light machine guns, demolition charges. The training assumed that artillery support would be unavailable, that armor wouldn't be present, that communications with higher headquarters would be impossible. Soldiers learned to fight effectively despite these limitations, using terrain for concealment, maneuver for tactical advantage, and aggression to compensate for lack of firepower that conventional units would have available. The psychological conditioning was critical. Training deliberately created stressful situations where soldiers were isolated, uncertain of objectives, operating without information about friendly or enemy positions. Soldiers who couldn't maintain effectiveness under these conditions were removed from training. British airborne doctrine required men who would continue fighting regardless of circumstances, who wouldn't surrender when surrounded, who would attack when conventional military judgment would recommend defense or withdrawal. The selection process and training created force that German officers described as fanatical, but which British commanders understood was simply soldiers who'd been prepared psychologically for operating under conditions that other troops would find intolerable. Pegasus Bridge. The capture of bridges over the Caen Canal and Orne River demonstrated British airborne capability to seize objectives with precision that German forces hadn't believed was possible during night operations. The operation required gliders carrying assault troops to land within meters of the bridges, disembark troops immediately, and seize the structures before German defenders could destroy them. The timing was critical. If German forces had warning, they would demolish the bridges, denying British airborne forces their objectives and complicating link-up between airborne units and seaborne invasion forces scheduled to land at dawn. The gliders approached silently, released from tow aircraft minutes before reaching targets. German sentries heard nothing until gliders were landing. The first warning German defenders received was the sound of gliders touching down less than 100 meters from the bridges. British troops were out of gliders and assaulting within seconds, engaging German sentries before alarm could be raised properly. The bridge over the Caen Canal was secured in approximately 10 minutes. The bridge over the Orne River captured shortly after. German forces positioned to defend the bridges were killed or captured before they could execute demolition procedures. The tactical execution demonstrated training and discipline that German forces found difficult to credit. Landing gliders at night within meters of specific targets required extraordinary pilot skill and precise navigation. Disembarking and assaulting immediately required troops who could transition from flight to combat instantly despite stress and disorientation from landing. Seizing objectives before defenders could respond required speed and aggression that most infantry couldn't maintain. The operation succeeded because British airborne forces had trained specifically for this type of mission and had been selected for psychological characteristics that allowed them to execute effectively under conditions that would overwhelm conventional forces. German response was confused and ineffective. Local commanders couldn't determine what had happened, whether this was major assault, whether other bridges had been attacked, how many British troops were involved. Communications were disrupted when British forces cut telephone lines and captured radio equipment. German units attempting to retake the bridges moved slowly, uncertain about enemy strength, unwilling to conduct night attacks against positions that might be heavily defended. By dawn, British airborne forces had consolidated defenses, established anti-tank weapons, and prepared to hold against German counterattacks that arrived too late to prevent the bridge's capture. The psychological warfare British paratroopers operating at night created psychological effects that degraded German combat effectiveness beyond the physical casualties they inflicted. German soldiers learned that night meant vulnerability to attacks from unexpected directions. Positions that were secure during daylight became potential targets after sunset. Supply routes that were safe in daylight required heavy escorts after dark. Movement that was routine in daylight became dangerous when visibility was limited. The cumulative effect was that German forces modified their behavior based on fear of British airborne attacks, accepting constraints that reduced their operational effectiveness even when British paratroopers weren't actually present. The inability to assess British strength or positions created constant uncertainty. German commanders couldn't determine whether reports of British activity indicated major threat requiring substantial resources to counter, or whether small groups of paratroopers were creating impression of larger force through aggressive patrolling and hit-and-run attacks. This uncertainty led to both overreaction, allocating excessive forces to counter threats that proved smaller than estimated, and underreaction, dismissing reports as exaggerated when actual British strength was substantial. Neither response was optimal, and German commanders couldn't reliably distinguish between situations requiring different approaches. The targeting of command and control elements was a particularly effective psychological weapon. British paratroopers deliberately attacked headquarters, killed or captured officers, destroyed communications equipment. German officers learned that their positions made them priority targets, that operating command posts exposed them to night raids. That movement revealed their importance to British observers. Some German officers began sleeping in different locations each night, limiting radio transmissions that might reveal headquarters positions, avoiding activities that would identify them as high-value targets. The measures reduced their effectiveness as commanders while demonstrating that British paratroopers were successfully creating climate of fear that affected German leadership behavior. The persistence of British attacks despite isolation and losses created impression that British forces either didn't understand they were surrounded or simply didn't care. German doctrine assumed that encircled units would attempt to break out or would surrender when their situation became untenable. British paratroopers continued attacking even when completely cut off, even when casualties had reduced their effective strength substantially, even when German forces outnumbered them decisively. The psychological impact on German troops was substantial. If enemy forces wouldn't surrender despite hopeless situations, how could German forces defeat them? The demonstration that British paratroopers would fight to death rather than surrender created hesitation among German soldiers who realized that engaging British airborne forces meant accepting casualties that other operations wouldn't require. Italy and Arnhem operations in different theaters demonstrated that British paratrooper effectiveness at night wasn't unique to Normandy, but represented consistent capability that German forces encountered wherever British airborne forces operated. Italian operations showed British paras operating in mountainous terrain at night, conditions that amplified the advantages their training provided. The mountains offered numerous concealment positions, limited visibility even during daylight, and created navigation challenges that were severe at night. British paratroopers used the terrain expertly, establishing positions on high ground that German forces couldn't approach without being observed, conducting raids against German positions during darkness when German defenders were least alert, withdrawing before German forces could organize effective responses. German commanders in Italy reported that British paratroopers were exceptionally dangerous after sunset, that German forces avoided movement at night when British airborne units were known to be operating nearby, and that attempts to dislodge British paras from positions they'd established typically required daylight operations with substantial artillery support. Arnhem demonstrated that British paratroopers remained effective even when operations went catastrophically wrong, and when German response was more effective than British planning had anticipated. The operation failed strategically. British forces couldn't hold the bridge long enough for ground forces to link up. Casualties were severe, and most paratroopers who survived were eventually captured. But the tactical execution during the battle showed British paratroopers maintaining effectiveness despite being outnumbered, surrounded, and cut off from resupply. German forces attacking British positions at Arnhem advanced cautiously, aware that British paratroopers would fight for every building, that casualties would be heavy, that British forces wouldn't surrender until resistance became physically impossible. The respect German commanders showed for British paratrooper capabilities was evident in how deliberately and carefully they conducted operations to eliminate British positions. Even when German forces had overwhelming advantage, they approached British paratroopers with caution, born from understanding how dangerous those forces were, regardless of circumstances. The final assessment. Friedrich Holzer survived the war with memories that included being effectively paralyzed as a commander during night operations when British paratroopers were known to be operating in his sector. His company remained combat effective during daylight operations, but after sunset, Holzer couldn't assess his situation accurately, couldn't trust information he received, couldn't determine where British forces were positioned or what they were doing. The helplessness he felt during those nights, knowing enemies were present but unable to locate or engage them effectively, remained with him as example of how military forces could be defeated psychologically even when they retained physical capability to fight. The British paratrooper capability at night represented combination of selection, training, doctrine, and psychological preparation that created soldiers who could operate effectively under conditions that would disable conventionally trained forces. The training emphasized night operations until darkness became comfortable rather than threatening. The selection process identified soldiers who could maintain effectiveness when isolated and uncertain. The doctrine embraced chaos as operational principle rather than attempting to avoid it. The psychological conditioning prepared soldiers to fight aggressively regardless of tactical circumstances. German forces never developed effective counters to British airborne night operations because the capability wasn't primarily technological or tactical. It was psychological and doctrinal. German forces could have equipped their troops with better night vision equipment, could have improved communication security, could have enhanced defensive measures around key facilities. Those improvements would have reduced British effectiveness marginally, but wouldn't have eliminated the fundamental advantage British paratroopers possessed through training and selection that prepared them specifically for operating at night when most soldiers found darkness disabling. German officers who fought against British paratroopers at night never forgot the experience. The combination of precision attacks from unexpected directions, inability to assess British strength or positions, fear that any movement would attract fire from enemies they couldn't see. Those factors created stress that exceeded what conventional combat produced. German soldiers could fight Soviet forces during Stalingrad, could defend against American armor at Bastogne, could conduct organized withdrawals under extreme pressure. But British paratroopers operating at night created different type of fear. Not terror of being killed, but fear of helplessness, of being unable to respond effectively to threats, of watching their command structure dissolve because information was unreliable and coordination was impossible. The British paratroopers, who earned German officers' particular hatred, weren't necessarily more aggressive or better soldiers than other elite units. They were simply forces that had been optimized for operating at night, that had been trained until darkness was comfortable operational environment rather than constraint on military operations. When night fell and British powers were present, German forces lost many advantages that daylight operations provided: observation, coordination, effective employment of heavy weapons. British forces gained advantages through training that allowed them to navigate, communicate, and fight effectively when German forces found those same tasks difficult or impossible. The resulting tactical situation favored British operations decisively, creating circumstances where relatively small British forces could achieve effects that would have required much larger conventional units to accomplish.